Hey guys, my name is Elias. I'm a pre-med student and I just took the MCAT and I wanted to teach a little biology for people who don't have a biology background. I think biology is a very tough subject and it was what I studied in college, so I think I have a pretty good understanding of it, but I know that not everybody does, and I think it can be a big barrier for people who want to go to medical school. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to cover kind of like a chapter 1 introductory type course. So, first things first, let's talk about the cell. Okay. So, first thing in the cell, I want to talk about what a eukaryotic cell is. So a eukaryotic cell are the cells that are most familiar to us, and to me they kind of look like a fried egg. So I'm going to draw it out for us. Okay. Eukaryotic cell, kind of looking like a fried egg. Eukaryotic cells are the cells that make up us. So these are your bone cells, your brain cells. Basically, any cell in an animal is a eukaryotic cell. Importantly to know, eukaryotic cells always have a true nucleus. Okay. I'll cover what that means in a second. They also have membrane-bound organelles. And I apologize for any spelling mistakes. I studied biology and I did not study English, and that's going to become very apparent. So, for the MCAT, two things you need to know about eukaryotic cells is they always have a true nucleus and they have membrane-bound organelles. So if you ever get encountered with a question that says that this thing does not have a nucleus or does not have membrane-bound organelles, then automatically it's not a eukaryotic cell. Make sense? Sounds good. Okay, so what does this thing mean? Membrane-bound organelles and a true nucleus? What does that mean? Well, let me show you. Okay, so I'm going to redraw that. Eukaryotic cell. Okay, first things first. Let's just go over the basic quote-unquote anatomy of what these cells look like. So, for starters, this is kind of the fried egg. Here we have the cell membrane. Okay? So the cell membrane is really important because it kind of separates the outside, which is all this stuff, from the inside, which is everything in here. Now you might ask, why is that important? I want you to kind of think of it like this. Segmentation, or putting things in containers that are contained, it's redundant, but putting things in a contained space allows them to become useful. So for example, when you fill up your car, you put your gas in the tank, right? The gas is not useful to you until you put it in the tank, which it's contained. And the car is set up so that because the gas is in the tank, it can go to wherever it needs to be. The same is true for cells. So they need to be contained in specific places in order for things to work. And those divisions are accomplished by membranes. So this is the cell membrane. Okay, we'll cover membranes in detail later. This separates the outside world from the inside of the cell. So this is like the walls of the house. Next up, we have the nucleus. Okay, the nucleus is what contains DNA. DNA. Okay, that's all you need to know right now. We're going to cover DNA later. It also contains a little portion called the nucleolus. Okay, but that's not really important. All you need to know is that it makes ribosomal RNA. Okay, it's okay if you don't know what that means. You just need to remember that. So the nucleus contains DNA. The cell membrane separates the outside from the in. Okay, what's next? What's everybody's favorite organelle? Of course, it's the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And that is true. So here we have the mitochondria. Okay, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it has two membranes. Okay, so this is the outer and this is the inner, and this is important for its function. Don't stress about this right now. We'll cover the mitochondria later. This is just a general overview, but remember, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It makes ATP. Okay, if you don't know what ATP is right now, that's okay. But ATP is a molecule that your cell uses for energy. Think of it kind of as gas. So this is like a gas refinery, and it's making the energy source. It has two membranes, and that's it. Okay. Got a few more, and then that's all you'll need to know for the MCAT. So after that, we have this kind of weird dish-looking thing, okay? This is called the endoplasmic reticulum. There's two types of endoplasmic reticulum. This is the smooth one. And the endoplasmic reticulum is often abbreviated as ER. So this is the smooth ER, okay, because it doesn't have these dots. Next, we have the rough ER. What's the difference? Well, they're just named differently because they look different, but they actually also do different things. So for the rough ER, this is the important one. Rough ER helps make protein. Protein is really important for basically everything in the cell. Everything in the cell, every function, every building block, whatever, are usually made by proteins. Hormones can be made by proteins. Like so many things are made by proteins. Antibodies, etc., etc. So proteins are one of the most important concepts to understand on the MCAT. And because they're so important, I'm just going to leave it at this for now, that the rough endoplasmic reticulum helps make proteins. And the things that help do that are these ribosomes. Okay? Ribosomes are structures that help synthesize proteins. An easy way to remember that the rough ER has ribosomes is that they both have an R. Boom. R. Rough ER has ribosomes that makes proteins. Okay, I'll just give you a second to let that sink in. The smooth ER is not really important for the MCAT, so all you need to know is it just helps with lipids, and it's kind of even extra information. Few more organelles. Okay, let me draw this cell one more time, and let me specify again. This is the eukaryotic cell. Okay, so again, cell membrane. You got that nucleus in the middle. To me, this is looking like a fried egg. Okay, so we understand that this has DNA. This protects and basically makes a container between the outside and the in. We know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. We know the rough endoplasmic reticulum makes proteins because they have ribosomes. So there must be other things, right? There are. These organelles are a little bit more low yield, but you're still going to need to know them for the MCAT. So the first one is the lysosome. Okay. Lysosome. Okay. The lysosome lyses things. So have you heard of Lysol? Lysol is something that you use to basically clean, right? It's like something that can kill bacteria, etc. It's like a wipe. Okay. It's basically the same thing. A lysosome is a organelle that helps break down things. I know that things is very generic, but it's true. It kind of is like a recycling center. So it can help recycle cell components. It can help kill bacteria that are in the cell. It's just kind of like an organelle that has these little proteins in them that are really good at destroying things. It's a recycling center. Okay. After that, you have the Golgi apparatus. Okay. Golgi apparatus kind of looks like this stack, like a big bunch of pancakes, and they have these little balls. What the Golgi apparatus does is it's like a shipping center. So it takes things from one part of the cell and it moves them to different parts of the cell. It's like a shipping center. Interestingly to note, if you want a little bit more of an advanced, example, some bacteria can actually use the Golgi to enter the cell. So normally if the Golgi is used to export something, meaning taking something, for example, let's say this is an immune cell, and let's say we want to put antibodies in the blood. What might happen is we'll go through the Golgi and it'll shoot out. So it'll really shoot out the bacteria, the antibodies, okay? What can happen is some bacteria that are very sneaky, they can do a reverse of this, meaning they can hijack the system and go through the Golgi to get in. So it's interesting. It's one way of getting in and out of the cell. So that's the Golgi. Golgi. And last thing. Peroxisome. All you need to know about this is it can help with beta oxidation. Beta oxidation is a way to get energy from fats. If this is confusing to you, just know that I'm going to be covering this later on. So start from the beginning. Okay. Here is a eukaryotic cell. They always have a true nucleus and they have membrane-bound organelles. Okay. These organelles are the nucleus, which contains DNA, the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, where the rough helps make protein because they have ribosomes. You have the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell that makes ATP. You have the lysosome, which helps break down things. You have the peroxisome, which helps with getting energy from fat. And finally, you have the Golgi apparatus, which is the shipping center for getting things into the cell and taking things out of the cell. I think now that we've covered the organelles, it's really important to look at what it means for a membrane. So a membrane is really something that separates. So I brought some props. These Ziploc bags are membranes. Okay, so here I have a Ziploc bag of Cheerios. Here I have a Ziploc bag of garlic. And here I have some water. Okay, so what am I doing? I think membranes can be a confusing topic because it seems simple and people teach it as it's simple, but it's really not. So let me just explain what I'm doing here. Let me give you an example of what a cell is. So imagine this as where the cells live, okay? It's just a big pool of water and there's all sorts of stuff in there. Let's call this bag of Cheerios the cell. Let's call this the cell membrane, okay? This is the cell membrane. This is all the little stuff in there. But remember, we have other organelles. For example, this garlic right here, let's call the nucleus. And it also has its own membrane. Why does that matter? Why can't everything just exist together? Well, if I put this in the water along with the garlic, everything would get wet, right? But if I put him in and I close them up together, and now I put it in the water, you can see that for one, the Cheerios aren't getting wet. And obviously the garlic isn't getting wet either. But at the same time, the garlic and the Cheerios are not mixing. So it's like layers of containment, right? It's like, at least for me, I have a shopping bag of bags that I store my bags in. You know what I mean? When you get those 10-cent bags. Anyways, that's what your cell does. It just uses these membranes as compartments, and it helps make compartments of things. Oh, you got a little camera shake. Let me see if I can fix that real quick. Anyways, that's what the membrane is. Okay. Last part, we're going to be covering the cytoskeleton. Okay. Here's the cytoskeleton. Let's break it down really quick. Cytoskeleton. Cyto, like cytoplasm. Plasm. Skeleton, like skeleton. It's really important for the MCAT that you break things down, because the MCAT, a lot of it is just being able to think about things. They're going to throw a lot of words at you, a lot of stuff that you've never covered before, and you're going to kind of have to figure it out on your own. So cytoskeleton is really kind of just sounds like a cytoplasm skeleton. What could that be? Well, it's what gives your cell structure and strength. So a cell isn't kind of like this just bag of nothing. It's actually very rigid. It's actually very rigid. And it can connect to each other and hold. So for example, your bones are made of these extremely rigid cells that stack. Okay? If they didn't have a skeleton, your bones wouldn't be able to withstand pressure. They would just squish. So cytoskeleton is very important. There's 3 main types that you'll need to know for the MCAT. Okay. Number 1 is the microfilaments. Okay. Number 2 are the microtubules. And number 3 are the intermediate filaments. Okay. Microfilaments. That doesn't really tell us much, but if you think about it, micro meaning small, filament like a, little small thing like a fishing wire. Microfilaments like a little wire. Okay. What does a microfilament do? Microfilaments basically kind of provide support and structure to the cell. So, here's an example of a cell. You'll find microfilaments all around the outside and not much in the middle. They kind of are like a big, dense network that prevents the cell from changing shape. As well, they are involved in voluntary movement. So, for example, if you've heard of something called actin, that is a microfilament. Actin interacts with different proteins and it helps with movement. Next up, we have microtubules. Let's draw another cell. So remember, cell membrane, interior of the cell, the nucleus. Microtubules are basically highways inside the cell. So if you think of a cell, you realize it's not just some ball, but it's actually organized into organelles and things, and there's certain places and certain things. So for example, like a sperm cell has one tail at one end. Well, how does it know? It doesn't have a brain. How can we segment things? So we know that the cell has a way to put certain things in certain places. How does it do that? It does that via microtubules. Microtubules usually come from the center and radiate outwards. Microtubules are kind of like freeways for your body's machines. So for example, if we want to get, let's say, a flagella, so if you think of a sperm cell, it has that little tail. If we want to get a flagella right here, and if for example, the rough endoplasmic reticulum makes a flagella, how does it know to get there? Well, what it'll do is it'll use these highways. They're kind of interconnected. It will use these highways, walk along there, and it'll get to where it needs to go. It'll literally crawl. The flagella will be attached to some crawling protein. It'll crawl along like that and get to where it needs to go. It's really cool. If you have time, I would look into microtubule highways. It's super interesting stuff. Finally, microfilaments are the lowest yield, I would say, type of cytoskeleton. They really just mediate cell-cell adhesion. What does that mean? Well, you know that eukaryotes can be single-celled or multicellular. Like us, for example, we are multicellular. So how do our cells attach? They do this via intermediate filaments that kind of just connect, kind of like staples almost, connect the cell membranes together. Is this making sense? But for you, for the MCAT, microfilaments give the structure. And when you think microfilament, think actin. When you think microtubules, think of movement, moving things around in the cell. And think of tubulin. That's what makes up microtubules. And think of mitosis/meiosis. We'll cover this later. Okay, I think that does it for the eukaryotic cell structure. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any advice on things you'd like me to change up, let me know. But for now, this will conclude our section on the eukaryotic cell. Just to wrap things up, I want to do some key points, which is that eukaryotic cells can be single-celled or multicellular. They contain nucleus. They have organelles, and they have multiple stretches of DNA. Eukaryotic cells make up the animals that we know. They make up our bodies. And most of what you're going to be tested on the MCAT will be eukaryotic cells. Okay, thank you very much.